Welcome to Decoding Devy. I am Brandon Hay. You can find me on Twitter at HeyB3. And Decoding Devy is brought to you by the IDP guys. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page and look for us on TikTok for tons of great videos, content, podcasts, and make sure also to subscribe to our website with tons of rankings and articles and everything you would want to win your fantasy football leagues. So, College football week 1, the full slate is over. It had a lot of exciting games, a lot of great players. I did not very good betting wise. So let's get into what happened week 1 and what we can look forward into week 2. So some main games, mostly the ranked games. Thursday night, West Virginia played Pittsburgh, two quarterbacks that used to be highly thought of in Devy. JT Daniels transferred from USC to Georgia to West Virginia, and then Keaton Slovis transferred from USC to Pittsburgh. Both of them are probably off of Devy radars, but it was a very exciting back and forth game. One of the big surprises was Rodney Hammond Jr. led in carries, and West Virginia really lost the game on a drop by one of the receivers, and then an interception ran for a touchdown by Pittsburgh. But another good backyard brawl on Thursday night, a great start to the first full week of college football. Then we had the nightcap of Ohio State and Notre Dame. Went totally different than I thought it would. I took the over of 59.5 points. I thought Ohio State would score at will. Notre Dame had a good game plan, keeping everything in front of them. And also a lot changed once Ohio State lost Jackson Smith and Jigba. Even before that, they weren't really moving the ball that great down the field. Ohio State in the second half, when they were losing, had to kind of go back to the short passing game and running the ball. Emeka Egbuka really got a lot of catches, got a touchdown. Took that role that Jackson Smith and Jigba usually does out of the slot, the short passing, after the catch. But there's a couple times he missed some of the nuances of route running to try to set in zones, and C.J. Stroud missed him a couple times. And this kind of showed some of the things that I hope Stroud continues to improve on for his NFL stock. If you get to him and kind of pressure him, and if he doesn't do too well at the beginning of games, sometimes he can be a little shaky throughout. He's big, when he can, find those open guys and throw it, then he does very well. So when they're dinking and dunking down the field and having to take longer drives down the field, that's when, they have to show patience. Notre Dame offensively, I thought, did some good things. The 3 running back rotation, I wish they would have just stuck with 1 or 2. You could tell they felt less comfortable with letting Tyler Buchner, the new starter, throw the ball in the second half. I thought they became too conservative in the second half. First half, I thought they did a lot of good things, and you would have to imagine Notre Dame, if you told them they were going to hold Ohio State to 21 points, they would have taken that. It's just the offense didn't hold up their end of the deal. Another game that I thought would be closer was Georgia versus Oregon. Oregon just looked totally overmatched. Bo Nix did more Bo Nix type things, throwing bad interceptions, not looking off defenders. Georgia's defense was amazing. Obviously, Stetson Bennett looked very good, throwing to all of his receivers, all of the tight ends. Kenny McIntosh had the most receiving yards for a running back for Georgia since 2000, beat what James Cook did last year in the playoff against Michigan. He looked very good, and Kendall Milton ran the ball well, 8 carries for 50 yards. Pretty much Georgia dominated everything, showed a little bit of all of their tight ends where they go 4 or 5 deep that could start pretty much anywhere. Another game that I was tad surprised by, I thought it would be close, is number 7 Utah traveling to the Swamp to play the Florida Gators. The Billy Napier era started off with a bang. Anthony Richardson still has a ways to go on passing. He only threw for around 160 yards passing, but they really used the run game with Montreal Johnson, Travis Etienne's brother from Clemson, and And Richardson, with the keepers, he had 3 rushing touchdowns, had one highlight play where he did spin move and then threw for a touchdown. Florida's defense did enough against Utah. Utah settled for some field goals, and then they were driving at the end of the game, and Florida came up with a big interception after dropping one earlier in the drive. Florida's defense played a lot better than I anticipated they would. Utah did rush for a lot, but Florida was, not the sieve that they were last year. And lastly, Cincinnati and Arkansas. Cincinnati kind of started off slow with Ben Bryant struggling much of the first half. The running backs didn't really get it going, but Corey Kiner, the transfer that I like from LSU, did have 12 carries for 59 yards and a touchdown. And then Arkansas, KJ Jefferson had some ups and downs like normal, but did find some chemistry with Jadon Hazelwood and Trey Knotts. Trey Knotts had a very good game at the tight end position, so he is someone to watch out for this year. And Rocket Sanders had another game over 100 yards, so Arkansas came out with a solid win there. So here are some of our Week 1 key performers. We knew that Alabama was going to win against Utah State, but they looked flawless. Bryce Young with new receivers looked great. 295 total yards, 6 touchdowns. One of the big things was he really had some long runs in this game, so to show off that. And then he found, Jermaine Burton for 2 touchdowns, Holden for 2 touchdowns. So really spreading the ball around. Drake May needed all his 428 total yards, 5 touchdowns. Josh Downs did not play this game. It didn't matter. And he needed all that in that tight game against Appalachian State. I talked about Anthony Richardson. Almost 300 yards, 3 touchdowns all on the ground, but he's definitely going to have to pass the ball better and be more efficient with that. So hopefully he can do that. But Utah does have a good defense. John Reese Plumlee is the starting quarterback at UCF now. He fits what they want to do. He was at Ole Miss as a mobile quarterback, moved to wide receiver, slot receiver last year with Matt Corral. Came and had 394 total yards and 5 touchdowns. I don't know how much he's on the Devy radar, but definitely in college fantasy leagues, he's someone you should pick up. Will Levis, not high on Levis, but he had a good game with his new receivers, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. They couldn't really get the rushing game going. Sean Tucker did more Sean Tucker type things, continue to, hopefully move up to running back 2 or 3. In the 2023 draft, 184 total yards, 2 touchdowns, had 6 receptions. The big thing for Syracuse is it looks like they might have more of a passing game this year with Garrett Schrader improving, and that can only help Sean Tucker get more room to roam. Braylon Allen, Wisconsin, didn't have a lot in an inferior opponent, but had 148 yards, 2 touchdowns, no receptions. So we'll see if he'll get some of that receiving work later on. A lot of people were excited to see Zach Evans from Ole Miss. He transferred from TCU, had 22 touches for 155 total yards, had 20 carries. So that's good because, there were rumors that he didn't want a large workload, and it looks like he might be the lead back there. So that can only help his draft stock. Another player that I was interested to see what they were doing Stanford, because we know they love to run the ball and play defense, is E.J. Smith. They had a couple running backs transfer out. He took full advantage, over 150 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Henry Pierce Jr. was a player I talked about in the spring, transfer from Ole Miss, and he went to Miami. He led the backfield with 133 total yards, 3 touchdowns. Knighton did not play in this game, so it'll be interesting to see how that rotation goes. But definitely if he gets more of that main first and second down will work, he's someone to kind of look at because he's very talented out of the backfield catching the ball. So he's someone that the film might like. And Zay Flowers had a very good game in a loss to Rutgers. Had 15 targets, 118 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jerkovic was really looking for him, but Jerkovic was up and down, and that's why they lost to Rutgers. But if he continually gets all of those targets, he's another one that I said could have a Chris Olave type type rise into the first round after he came back for his senior season. Here's some week 2 games. We'll just briefly go through. Alabama plays Texas. They're a big favorite of 20 points. This will be, another opportunity for Texas to prove that they're back. Quinn Ewers, looked pretty good in the first week against, not great competition. We'll see what Alabama does if they try to, load the box and stop Bijan Robinson, and then can Texas pass the ball? Will Bryce Young, continue his offensive onslaught? I want to see Jahmyr Gibbs maybe utilized more in the passing game. Only had 1 reception last week, but did have over 90 rushing yards. So I want to see him against, a premier type opponent. But I see Alabama winning this fairly easily. Baylor kind of spreads everything out. A bunch of different runners for them. Spread out the passing. Blake Shapen had a good game, 200 yards, a couple touchdowns. They're really going to play good defense. In BYU, last game, Christopher Brooks had 135 yards and a touchdown, so he's taking over for Tyler Algier. And Jaron Hall continues to be a player that I like, that can, is mobile, has a good arm and everything. Against USF, they just did whatever they wanted. So I think they might struggle a little bit against this good Baylor defense. So I'm actually taking Baylor to win this game. Kentucky plays Florida. Florida jumps up huge to number 12. Kentucky really needs to find a way to run the ball with Chris Rodriguez out. They couldn't really run the ball in the first week. They really depended on their, new receiving core, Tavian Robinson, Dane Key, and Barian Brown, which played very well the first week. See if that Florida defense can continue to cover Kentucky and contain Will Levis. Levis didn't really run the ball that much last week, so it'll be 2 quarterbacks that a lot of people like in this upcoming class, and Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. See if Florida can get that passing game going a little better. They don't really have the receivers. They have Pearsall, who transferred from Arizona State, but it's going to depend a lot on Anthony Richardson if he can get in rhythm, how Kentucky's going to defend that Florida running game. This one I can't really get a feel on, but I think since Florida is home, they will win a close one. Next, Tennessee goes to Pittsburgh. I was a little underwhelmed in what Pittsburgh did this past game, but they did win it. Obviously, they wanted to change how they really played this year. More run the ball control. Kanata Mumfield, had a good game with 70 receiving yards, his first game from transferring. Tennessee has that quick, high-powered offense, and then Hooker had a great game against Ball State. I was wrong on that also. I took the under on Tennessee versus Ball State, just their points, under 51, but they got well over that. They have Jabari Small, the freshman Justin Williams. Tillman, is good, and they have other receivers. So it's 2 different styles. And I actually think Tennessee's going to come away this one just because they're high-powered offense, and I don't know how much you can trust Keon Slovis at Pittsburgh. Another interesting matchup with 2 different type teams. Washington State, Cam Ward is coming over as a transfer from Incarnate World. He had 3 touchdowns last week, but was up and down passing, only 25 of 40. They had Nakia Watson had over 100 yards rushing. Wisconsin last week, we talked about Braylon Allen, did his normal thing. Graham Mertz passed the ball, well enough for 200 yards and a touchdown. The big thing will be, can they keep that offense balanced, get that passing game going that has kind of struggled the past couple of years, and Graham Mertz has really fallen off from his high recruiting status. So it'll be interesting how Cam Ward looks against this good Wisconsin defense, and see if he can keep them in the game and make Wisconsin have to make throwing plays in the second half. Last game is Houston, one of the G5 teams that I think could run the table. They had a tough one last week, winning in overtime. The offense struggled in the first half, but they scored 30 points in the fourth quarter in overtimes. So I think that offense gets back on track. And even though Texas Tech scored very easily last week, And Donovan Smith had 4 touchdowns in relief for Tyler Show, and he's going to be playing, so he might not give that job up. And Taj Brooks with 3 touchdowns. But Houston's going to have a much better defense, I think, with the experience with Clayton Tune at their quarterback and the weapons they have. I just think Houston will be able to outscore Texas Tech and keep up their hope to possibly do what Cincinnati did last year. There's some Devy players to watch. I kind of listed them. Quinn Ewers, Texas versus Alabama. I want to see how he does against this great Alabama team. The cards are going to be stacked against him. Don't necessarily expect him to lead Texas to a win over Alabama, but want to see how he does. Can he handle the pressure? Everyone has him highly rated, so how can him and that Texas offense really contend with Alabama? Spoke about Jahmyr Gibbs before. Want to see what he does, in a with a better opponent, and see how Saban and that offense really wants to utilize Gibbs. I was actually surprised he had as much rushing total as he did, over 90 yards, and not that much receiving work. Obviously, probably didn't need to do that, but I'll be interested to see how much he sees there. Hendon Hooker, he's going to put up huge numbers this year at Tennessee, plays Pittsburgh, but the question kind of is, can he do enough to, raise stock in NFL eyes since he's an older player? A lot in the rest of quarterbacks. Cam Ward, always talked about him. How does he do against Wisconsin? Anthony Richardson, can he keep that hype train rolling against Kentucky? Will Levis on the other side. That could actually be a very fun game back and forth, depending on what the defenses do. And then Jaron Hall from BYU, can he do what Zach Wilson did his last year and have some really breakout moments to move himself up the draft for 2023? And this is new this week. I'm going to have some time to talk about some IDP players to watch based on the last game. Ohio State's defense against Notre Dame was a lot better. Be interesting when they play other more high-profile offenses, how they do. But they definitely didn't miss assignments. They were going towards the ball. And one of the defensive linemen that stood out was Michael Hall Jr. He was everywhere. He already matched his number of snaps he had last year. He had 4 tackles, a sack, 2 tackles for a loss, and a hurry. And he just constantly was in the backfield. Jacoby Windman for Michigan State. He is a transfer from UNLV. He had his most sacks last year with 7, and he should crush that this year because he had 7 tackles, 4 sacks, and 4 tackles for a loss against Western Michigan. So, and he had, and that was only 47 snaps that first game. So over the whole season, he should crush that, his career high in stats, and he could be a player that could definitely be very interesting come the draft next year. Mikael Jones for Syracuse, he was a big reason why they were able to stop Malik Cunningham and really limit him. He had 9 tackles, 1 sack, and a tackle for loss. He has 2 years prior to this one with over 700 snaps, and he's amassed 127 tackles. Looks like he's a good leader. The team really rallies around him, and he's very fast to the ball. So he's another player to kind of look at. Another linebacker out of Cincinnati, Ivan Pace Jr. He had 12 tackles, 1 sack, and 3.5 tackles for a loss. Against Arkansas, he's a transfer from Miami of Ohio. Last year, he had over 800 snaps and 85 tackles. This year, he's on pace to get over 700 snaps again. So that could be 2 years back-to-back production. Obviously, Cincinnati, a little better competition for the NFL to see him. A player I talked about, on my top 25 guys to kind of look for this year for the 2023 draft. Felix Anudike-Uzomah, Kansas State. He had 3 tackles, a sack, 2 tackles for a loss, and a hurry. Not huge production, but the biggest thing with him is for the first time, he really had a lot of snaps, had over 500 last year and 13 sacks. So we just want to see that continued production in 2 straight years to move him up draft boards. So that's a good start to get 1 sack his first game. Lastly, Clemson just keeps on pumping out those defensive linemen, and KJ Henry had a very good game against Georgia Tech. 7 tackles, 1 sack, 2.5 tackles for a loss. This is his 5th year at Clemson. He's been under 400 snaps the last 3 years because of all those other good players coming through. He did have 40 snaps his first game, so it's projected that if he plays the whole season, he'd be well over 500 snaps. So he should match his production his whole career this year. And if he consistently looks like he did against Georgia Tech, he's definitely going to be in conversation for a first couple rounds of the draft next year. And also, I forgot to do this last week, so we're going to do some starts and some sits for fantasy-wise. So what we're going to do is the starts. We'll say it was a successful start if they are within the top 30 at their position, and sets will say, sets will say if they did end up in the top 30, then that was a bad set call. So we'll use the 30 at their position to kind of do that baseline and figure out how well I'm doing with this week to week. First, bias or not, J.J. McCarthy is getting his first start against Hawaii. Watching that Michigan game, they, of course, can run the ball. Defense looks like they'll be flying around. The biggest thing is Cade McNamara looked very poor. I think the quarterback competition is getting to him, but when McCarthy came in, he only threw 4 passes for 36 yards, but you saw his rushing ability with 50 rushing yards. Game at night, a bad Hawaii team. I think he just goes crazy. I could easily see over 300 total yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns for him against Hawaii. I think they're going to give him every opportunity to win that job in that game. Marvin Harrison Jr., I know he didn't do much against Notre Dame, but with Jackson Smith and Jigba out again, and Arkansas State's not going to be able to match up as well as Notre Dame did in kind of shortening the field. And I think Harrison is going to be the deeper threat for them getting the ball down the field. I see him having a big bounce back game and them wanting to get him more involved. Now Jaden Ott is a freshman running back for California. He already had 100 rushing yards last week and a receiving touchdown. UNLV is going to be better this year, but I don't know how much, especially defensively. So I see, Jaden Ott having a very big game against them in a game where they might be leading, so running out the clock. Zay Flowers, I think he is going to have another good game against Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech did not look very good, and they gave up a large amount of yards in the second half to Ollie Jennings III for Old Dominion last week. So as long as Zay Flowers gets around double-digit targets, I want him every week. And then Torrey Horton versus Middle Tennessee. He plays for Colorado State, transferred from Nevada. Actually ended up with an all-right game last week against Michigan. He did, have a nice long touchdown against one of their freshman corners, Will Johnson, who is highly rated, but he beat them on a deep pass. I think he's going to do well there, even though Colorado State was shut down by Michigan. I think that offense is going to be very good this year. Talked about the Baylor defense and Jaron Hall. Nathan Carter, running back for UConn. He's been very good this season, but that Syracuse defense looked very stout. See them stopping them there. Alec Jennings III, who I talked about, had a good second half against Virginia Tech. East Carolina really played good defense against NC State last year and really gave Leary all kinds of problems. NC State only scored 21 points, so I see him not having a great game this coming week. Nate Noel for Appalachian State. He did very well last week and seems to be the main running back, but Texas A&M, I see being able to stop the run, and they're going to have to throw the ball to keep up. Lastly is Sean Hennigan for Memphis. He didn't have a overly great game last week, but I definitely don't want to play him this week versus Navy just because all the armed forces, Navy, Army, Air Force, they all like to run the ball, control the ball, shorten possessions. So that really limits the amount of possessions, and that causes a lot of offenses to struggle. So the bets I liked last week, I went 0 for 4. Penn State ended up pulling it out. Actually, Penn State, that might be the one win, I believe. I'd have to look, but I think they won by enough. No, they didn't. I think they only won by 3. So that is a loss. Sorry about that. NC State definitely didn't win by 11.5. Houston struggled with UTSA, went into overtime, and then definitely get the over for the Notre Dame and Ohio State. I will say I did redeem myself betting last week. I took 5 money line wins on a parlay to win around $150 to recoup all my other bets. And in those, I had Houston, NC State, Penn State, South Carolina, and there was one other team, and they all ended up winning. So maybe I should stick to those money line bets. So now here's the week 2 bets I do like. I like Arkansas favored by 8.5 at home versus South Carolina. South Carolina struggled against Georgia State last week protecting the quarterback. I just think Arkansas is going to wreak havoc on Spencer Rattler. And until I see him really produce through passing the ball, I just don't trust them. UNLV at California, the over-under is 49. I'm going over. I think UNLV, even if it's a garbage time, will get some points. I think California will be able to score. So I take the over there. Syracuse's defense is one of the reasons I take them by 22.5 over UConn. I think they will be able to shut down UConn pretty well. And with Sean Tucker and Garrett Schrader, they should be able to score enough to hit that spread. And then lastly, the over 59.5 for Mississippi State and Arizona. Jane DeLora, transferred to Washington State, looked really good with Arizona last week. Mississippi State with Rogers looked good also. We know that Leach teams don't necessarily play defense, so I could see that being a very high-scoring game, especially since it's at Arizona. Okay, so here's my DFS lineup from last week. I put out a tweet that Josh Downs was out, so in his stead, I brought in Zay Flowers. So as you can see, there's 2 really good calls, obviously starting Drake May and then the Zay Flowers. Leary really killed me. Demas didn't do much. Matthew Golden didn't do much. Donovan Edwards did all right with 13.8 points, and he was only 5,000. Devin Shane would have wanted more. So didn't do overly well this week. We'll try to do better next week, but you did listen to the Zay Flowers call and put him in your lineup, at least that part was good. Take a brief pause and just remind everyone that's watching that this podcast will be released every Wednesday at 9 a.m. and to like and subscribe to the IDP Guys YouTube channel. Tons of great content on there. We've been putting daily videos of busts and sleepers on offense and defense for all of the NFL teams. Tons of IDP videos on there. One that was just done by Mac Record about the fallout from Blake Martinez. So make sure you subscribe and check on that. Okay, now this week in DFS, I went all in on Bryce Young. I think he's going to have a huge game, even that huge salary. Also paid up for Chase Brown. Illinois can't throw the ball, so he's going to have to run the ball. And, he just looked so good. Laybourne from Marshall. I know Notre Dame has a good defense, but they allowed 2 runners to get over 80 yards last week for Ohio State. So I think they should be able to run that ball. And I just don't know how explosive that Notre Dame offense will be. So they might be able to continue to run the ball later in the game. Luther Burden plays Kansas State. They obviously want to get him the ball. He had a rushing touchdown, receiving touchdown. Biggest thing for me, even though he didn't have huge yardage totals, is they gave him 7 targets last week. So right away, they're trying to get him the ball. And I think they'll, work even more on that this week and under 6,000. I like that. Mitchell Tinsley at 5,700, I think is cheap. He was the main guy last week. Had 8 catches and a touchdown. I think Parker Washington should bounce back, but Tinsley is still going to be very involved in that offense. I said I liked Houston versus Texas Tech. So Nathaniel Dell at 6,000, I think he's going to be really big with Clayton Tune. Always gets open. Then this one, not as sure about, but Lorenzo Styles for Notre Dame. He looked like the big play receiver for them. So I see him getting more open against Marshall. So hoping he can, beat out that 7.9 fantasy points per game. And last, Quinn Ewers. This is kind of just, a big, risk and reward. He's not that much at 5,700. And to keep up with Bama, they're just going to have to throw the ball. So he's going to have to play well. And I could see, at least early in the first half, kind of a back and forth shootout in this game. Price Picks haven't started off the season too strong either. 3-9. This week, the only one that I got correct was the John Reese Plumlee, 23 or more fantasy points. Cropper didn't get a touchdown. Washington definitely didn't get 5.5 receptions. Stroud not over 29.5 fantasy score. And Israel Abakanda definitely didn't get that 52.5 rushing yards. Don't really know what's going on with their running back rotation. So this week we went with Will Levis to get over 20.5 fantasy points. I just think he's going to do that, with his rushing ability. He had a bad game against Florida last year, but I think he'll play better this year. Grayson McCall to get over 251.5 pass yards / rush yards. I think he's definitely going to do that this week against, a lesser opponent. Keaton Mitchell for Eastern Carolina. I have over the 85.5. I know he only had 32 rushing yards around that last week, but Old Dominion did give up a 100-yard rusher to Virginia Tech last week, so I think Mitchell should be able to get that 85.5. Lastly, Tyler Hudson on receptions, 5.5 against UCF on Friday. Cunningham really looked to Hudson often. He had, I believe, 8 catches last week. He looked very good, steady with the ball. So I think he'll continue to throw the ball to him. Hopefully that Louisville offense rebounds because Cunningham looked very bad last week. But against UCF, I think they're just definitely going to have to, be explosive and score with them. So I could see Hudson getting a lot of targets. So that does it for the week 1 review, week 2 preview. It's going to be another great week of college football. Make sure to like the video, comment on any players, anything you disagree with, any of the bets that really helped you win some money. And make sure to subscribe to the IDP Guys YouTube channel. And I will see you guys next week for another great week of college football.